The Swedes are probably not the first people you think of when you think of European colonial powers. But that's what makes it so exciting. The Swedes, always known as a seafaring nation, also wanted a piece of the New World pie, which is why they undertook long voyages across the Atlantic. However, they not only conquered colonies in North America, but also expanded into Africa and annexed islands in the Caribbean. So today we are taking a look at the exciting history of the often forgotten Swedish colonial empire. By around the year 1750, Sweden had risen to become one of the most powerful nations in Europe and reached its greatest extent. In addition to regions in present-day Norway, Finland and Russia, it also possessed Baltic territory in present-day Estonia and Latvia and territories in Germany and Poland. And like all powerful European states at the time, Sweden wanted to extend its power further, which is why it turned its eyes to America. Sweden founded the New Sweden Company, which was to support colonization in a similar way to the West India Company of the British and Dutch. The company's first task was to trade in tobacco and furs in North America and to establish the first Swedish base in the New World. To assist them, they recruited the experienced Dutch explorer Peter Minuit, who had already founded the colony of New Netherland in what is now Manhattan for the Dutch a few decades earlier. However, he was dismissed by his employer and now wanted to get back at the Dutch. He therefore helped the Swedes to found a colony in a strategically vulnerable part of New Netherland. In the year 1637, the Swedes established a first base called Fort Christina in what is now Delaware, which was named after the Swedish Queen Christina. The Swedes subsequently expanded further and further along the Delaware River and established the other bases of Fort Elfsborg and Fort New Gothenburg, as well as increasing trade with the locals. The main problem, however, was that the Swedes' enthusiasm for the colonies was not as great as in other European countries, which is why only a few Swedes and Finns moved to America and the colony never had more than a few hundred inhabitants. In addition, there was growing pressure from the Dutch, who still regarded the area around the Delaware River as their own territory. When the Swedes continued to expand there until the year 1654, the Dutch retaliated. They were clearly superior to the Swedes and therefore forced all Swedish outposts to surrender within a very short time, which meant that New Sweden was lost after less than 2 decades. But that was not the end of the Swedes in America. But first let's take a look at Africa. From the year 1650, Sweden increasingly intervened on the west coast of Africa. It founded the Swedish Africa Company and commissioned its most capable men to acquire a colony in Africa. Thus, in April of the year 1650, the colony of the Swedish Gold Coast was founded, which stretched along the coast of what is now Ghana and Togo. Several outposts were established, such as Fort Karlsborg and the capital, Fort Christiansborg. Sweden used its colony primarily as a base for the Atlantic slave trade by shipping African slaves to America. However, the African colonial empire was also short-lived. The Swedish governor of the Gold Coast changed sides after a dispute and sold the territory to the Dutch. However, when the Swedish king refused to relinquish the territory, the Dutch laid siege to Christiansborg Fort and after a long defense by the Swedes, they were able to conquer it. But just 1 year later, the British arrived and claimed the coast for themselves again, eventually establishing the British colony of Gold Coast. Sweden's colonial adventures were then interrupted for over 100 years. It was not until the year 1784 that the Swedes made a new attempt in America. In exchange for trading rights, it acquired the Caribbean island of Saint Barthélemy from France, which can certainly be described as a successful colony. The island grew into an important trading post in the Caribbean and was very popular with emigrants from Sweden and other European countries, particularly due to its liberalism and religious tolerance. The colony existed for over 100 years, and it was only in the year 1877 that Sweden sold it back to France, as a large number of French people were now living there. Incidentally, Sweden also owned the island of Guadeloupe for about a year during the Napoleonic Wars, but after a short time it had to be ceded again. The final question is what the Swedish colonial empire left behind. Despite the few colonies, the Swedes certainly left their mark, especially in America. On the one hand, they brought Lutheran Christianity to the New World. On the other hand, they established log cabins, which later became an integral part of North American architecture. Today, around 1.3 million Swedes live in the United States.